More docs have been found in Joe Biden's home, and now some documents, apparently also classified, have been found in the home of former Vice President Mike Pence. Joining me to discuss this is Mike Davis, president and founder of the Internet Accountability Project. Mike, thank you very much for coming back. I appreciate it. Mike Pence has docs too?
Yeah, it seems like we have a problem here. Former presidents are allowed to take their presidential records when they leave office. Presidents have the constitutional power as commander-in-chief to declassify any document they want. They have the statutory power under the Presidential Records Act to take.
Now, Mike Pence is vice president.
I understand. What I was going to say, Larry, is vice presidents do not have that power. So vice presidents, whether they are Joe Biden or vice presidents, whether they are Mike Pence, do not have the power to declassify and take the president for whom they work their presidential recorks. And so
Mike, what's the over under when we find out that Barack Obama has classified documents in Martha's Vineyard?
It's very interesting. It seems like they've all had taken these presidential records. I will say this, that former presidents Congress understands that former presidents will have their presidential records, including classified presidential records, when they leave office. The Presidential Records Act allows them to take it. That's why they get federally funded office space, secure office space called SCIFs, federally funded staff with security clearances, lifetime Secret Service protection. Contrast that with former vice presidents. They don't get any of that. They don't. Right. They get Secret Service protection for up to 6 months, and they don't get to take any presidential records, particularly classified presidential records. So it is a violation of the Espionage Act to have these presidential records, whether you're Vice President Biden or Vice President Pence. I will say you have to look at the circumstances here. Did Vice President Pence merely find documents? He seems to be a Boy Scout. Did he find documents and boxes that were packed for him that he had his lawyers go through when the scandal broke with Biden, and then found these documents and turned them over? Contrast that with former Vice President Joe Biden, who had at least five sets of classified documents and at least 3 different personal locations: his Wilmington home, in his private study at his home, his garage, and his China-funded Penn Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where it was funded by China, where he had this fake professorship in Washington, D.C. And there's also this reporting by Miranda Devine at the New York Post that Hunter Biden had this 22-point email back in 2014, where Hunter Biden all of a sudden had this wonderful strategic insight into Ukraine at the same time that Hunter was trying to get his Burisma deal. So he's an expert in crack, prostitutes, and Ukraine.
Now, let me go back for a second. Mike, call me naive, but what is it that a president wants or needs in having classified documents? What's the point?
Well, a former president, the Congress gives former presidents the ability to have classified documents, their presidential records, including classified records, because the current occupant of the White House may have to call on the former president to get his advice on, how to look at a particular national security matter. But again, that's Congress providing that for former presidents. Congress does not provide that for former vice presidents or anyone else. So it is a huge problem. Remember, the Biden Justice Department just threw a woman in jail back in 2021. She worked for the military, and she was going from her permanent duty station in Hawaii to a temporary duty station, and she didn't put the documents through the secure process that you send them through to go from one duty station to another, and she got thrown in prison for this. So this is a very serious matter when these politicians take their classified records. And again, you have to look at the circumstances. Were they in one spot? Were they secure? Were they all over the place like Biden had them? Was Pence on Chinese and Ukrainian oligarchs' payrolls like the Bidens? Those are the things you have to look at. I think the Biden's case is a lot more serious, but it doesn't mean that there's not an Espionage Act violation with Pence.
Mike, is it a defense to say that it was inadvertent? Is it a defense to say that we're cooperating and Donald Trump didn't?
It might be a defense to obstruction of justice charges to cooperate versus not cooperate, right? You can be charged with obstruction of justice if you don't cooperate, but these Espionage Act cases tend to be strict liability cases, or pretty close to strict liability cases, meaning if you have the documents and you're not supposed to have the documents, you're pretty well cooked under the Espionage Act. But I will say the Espionage Act does not apply to the President of the United States. He has inherent power as commander-in-chief under the Constitution to classify or declassify anything he wants. So when President Trump took his presidential records, declassified them, and took them when he left office, that's not a violation of the Espionage Act. Really, the only way Biden can get out of this one is if President Obama comes out and says, yeah, I told then Vice President Joe Biden that he can have these classified records. Other than that, Joe Biden really doesn't have a defense. And that's for the records when Joe Biden was vice president. Joe Biden really doesn't have a defense for the records he stole when he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Those are particularly bad.
Mike, aside from Joe Biden referring to Donald Trump as irresponsible and looking like a major hypocrite, there's an underlying problem here, and that is the exposure of sources and methods.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. There are different levels of classification. That case that I was talking about, the 2021 case, that woman was put in prison for having confidential and secret documents. Those are pretty low on the totem pole. When you're looking at top secret or even above top secret, the secure compartment of information, SCI, codenamed documents, you're really putting our sources and methods in danger by having those documents. And you have to ask, remember, the Hunter Biden had a key made for the Biden's Chinese foreign agent working with them on their scandalous deal. So you have these unguarded offices. Biden didn't have Secret Service protection for 2.5 years. He lost it 6 months after he left the vice presidency. He didn't get it again until he was attacked on the stage when he was a major presidential candidate 2.5 years later. So there's a 2.5 year gap where these documents are sitting in his personal files in his garage next to his Corvette. He admitted to Peter Doocy he knew that those documents were there, but they were okay because they're in his garage next to his Corvette, so they must have been safe. He had documents in his personal study. He had documents in his pen. Biden said, remember, if you look at Hunter Biden's gun background check, he says that he rented his father's Wilmington home for like $50,000 a month. It happened to be the same amount of money that the Chinese were paying Hunter Biden.
Must have been a coincidence.
Merely a coincidence that it matched to the dollar. So it's just, there's a lot that needs to be investigated here, Larry. And here's the problem: is that with Trump, the Garland went to a biased magistrate judge, got this unnecessary, unprecedented, unlawful home raid on Trump, the office of the former president, where he's allowed to have these records under the Presidential Records Act. This is in August. They had his lawyers standing outside, 95-degree heat, 95% humidity for hours while they went through Melania's lingerie drawer, teenage son Barron's room. They scoured the place, put on this big media production for President Trump with his lawful possession of his classified presidential records. Compare that with Biden. Attorney General Merrick Garland colluded with Biden to cover this up. They colluded with the Biden Justice Department. Garland colluded with Biden, his White House lawyers, his personal lawyers, to hide this for 2 months. And Biden saying, well, we turned this over to the Justice Department immediately when we found these documents around November 2nd. That's not true. First of all, they waited overnight, and then they contacted the political head of the National Archives. And the only reason the Justice Department learned about this is the Inspector General of the National Archives got wind of this and turned it over to the Justice Department. Otherwise, we probably never would have heard about this.
Do you think there are more Biden classified documents in his possession?
Yes, and they need to go search. They need to go search the Rehoboth beach home. They need to go search his boxes for his Senate records that he has stored, I think, at the University of Delaware. They need to search Hunter and the places where he's lived, James, the brother. There's very clear evidence that Hunter used stolen classified intel on Ukraine to write a 22-point email in 2014 to help get on the Burisma board of directors, the Ukraine energy company. And so Miranda Devine reported this, New York Post. She wrote The Laptop from Hell. The FBI needs to be interviewing Joe, Jill, Hunter, James, their Chinese agent, anyone who has had access to these homes and offices and access to these unguarded, stolen, classified records. They need to do an intel assessment immediately. And for the first 4 searches, the Biden Justice Department let Biden's attorneys do the searches. They didn't even have the FBI or anyone else at the DOJ involved. For the 5th search, they allowed Biden's attorneys to accompany the FBI and the Department of Justice on the search. This is a complete cover-up. It's a scam.
And the attorneys did not have necessarily top security clearance, did they?
No, I mean, the Biden White House attorneys would have had security clearances, presumably that they'd have Yankee White security clearance, but not the personal attorneys. Right. And so that's a huge problem. And the bigger problem is they allowed Joe Biden, Jill Biden, maybe Hunter, the attorneys to taint these national security crime scenes for 2 months, right? They should have been in there taking pictures of where they found these documents to show that Biden was using these, that this was not a mistake on his part, an inadvertent mistake. He had these and he had 5 sets of documents in at least 3 different locations, including in his personal files. Why didn't they take pictures of this? Why didn't they take pictures showing these were actually being used by Joe Biden?
Mike, you're not cynically suggesting that there's a dual standard of justice, are you? Now, last question. There are special counsels investigating Biden's classified documents and Trump's. What's going to happen?
Well, at the end of the day, this is Merrick Garland's decision. He's appointed these 2 special counsel. He appointed the Trumps. But now look at the timing. On November 2nd, they found out about these documents. They covered it up for 2 months. And 16 days later, on November 8th, when Garland should have appointed a special counsel immediately, he cannot investigate his boss, Biden. He appoints a special counsel, all right, but it's for Trump. So November 18th, they appoint this Jack Smith, this partisan Democrat special counsel for Trump. And then under political pressure, Garland appointed Robert Hur to be the special counsel for Biden. Remember, Robert Hur is a longtime protege of FBI Director Chris Wray, former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, James Comey. He's been a lawyer for the deep state for a long time. It was Robert Hur who was supposed to supervise the Mueller probe, the Russian collusion hoax. So you have to ask yourself, did Robert Hur know that it was a hoax and go along with it, or did he get duped? And either one of those is not a good sign for a special counsel investigating the current president of the United States. I think we know, Larry, what's going to happen here. They're going to let Biden go, and they're going to come out with some sort of a scathing report on Trump and maybe even charges.
Mike Davis, Internet Accountability Project. Mike, as always, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.